The Winchester rifle cracked across the mountain valley, its echo bouncing off granite walls like thunder. Donna Wilson worked the lever action with practiced precision, ejecting the spent brass as three more riders crested the ridge. They had found her camp just as she knew they would. The ghost of the mountains had left them a trail to follow, and now they were exactly where she wanted them. The lead rider, Stephen Wright, raised his hand to halt his men. Even from 200 yards away, Donna could see the confusion on his weathered face. They had expected to corner a grieving widow hiding in the wilderness with her stolen horse. Instead, they found defensive positions carved into the rock face and a sniper who had already dropped two of their number with shots that would have made her old Army instructors proud. She chambered another round and settled the crosshairs on Wright's chest. The morning sun caught the barrel of her rifle, sending a deliberate flash of light across the valley. A message. She could take him anytime she chose. Wright spurred his mount forward, shouting over the wind. "You killed my men, woman. That horse belongs to Mr. Collins now. You got no right." Donna Wilson stepped out from behind the boulder that had been her cover. At 53, she moved with the controlled grace of someone who had spent decades learning to kill efficiently. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her copper eyes held the cold patience of a predator. "I gave you fair warning 3 days ago," she called back. "That was more courtesy than you deserved. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. You will not want to miss what happens when the ghost finally stops holding back." But to understand how Donna Wilson became the terror-stalking Dennis Collins and his men through the Colorado high country, we need to go back to where it all began. Back to the morning when they made the fatal mistake of thinking a widow living alone was easy prey. 4 days earlier, Donna had been living the quiet life she had built for herself in the shadow of Mount Elbert. The cabin sat in a natural meadow, surrounded by aspen groves that turned gold each fall and provided perfect cover for anyone who knew how to use terrain tactically. Most people saw it as a peaceful homestead. Donna saw it as a fortress with multiple escape routes and clear fields of fire. She rose before dawn as she had every day for the past 3 years, since the fever took her husband Thomas. The morning routine never varied. Check the perimeter for tracks, inspect the fence lines, count the horses, clean and oil the weapons hidden throughout the property. Make coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The horses were her pride and her livelihood. She bred and trained mountain horses, animals tough enough to carry a man through terrain that would kill a flatlander's mount. But one horse stood apart from the rest. Black Thunder, a coal-black stallion with the intelligence of a human and the heart of a warrior. Thomas had given her that horse as a wedding gift, and she had trained him to respond to whistle commands that only she knew. That morning, as autumn frost crunched under her boots, Donna noticed something wrong immediately. The gate to Black Thunder's paddock hung open, the lock cut clean through with bolt cutters. Professional work. The kind of clean entry that spoke of planning and experience. She knelt beside the fence post, reading the story written in disturbed earth and hoof prints. 5 horses, shod for hard travel. The riders had approached from the north, moving in formation, military precision. They had taken Black Thunder and ridden south toward the Valley Road, making no effort to hide their trail. Most people would have ridden to town for the sheriff. But Donna Wilson had not always been a widow trying to make peace with grief in the Colorado mountains. Before she was Thomas Wilson's wife, before she chose love over duty, she had been Sergeant Donna Hayes of the 3rd Special Forces Group, the woman who could track a man across bare rock and put a bullet through a silver dollar at 300 yards. She walked back to the cabin with the measured pace of someone making tactical decisions. In the bedroom she shared with Thomas's memory, she moved aside the loose floorboard that hid her past. The metal case had not been opened in 3 years, but the oiled hinges moved silently. Inside lay the tools of her former trade, the custom Winchester Model 1876 that had never missed its target, the Colt's single action army that had cleared leather faster than most men could blink, the silver badge that marked her as a federal marshal, a commission that had never been officially revoked. And beneath it all, wrapped in oiled cloth, the daguerreotype of a younger woman in army blues standing beside men who had died for their country. Donna lifted the photograph and stared at the stranger she used to be. Sergeant Hayes had been carved from granite and tempered in fire. She had tracked Apache warriors across the Arizona territory and brought in outlaws that other lawmen feared to face. But that woman had died the day she met Thomas Wilson and chose to become someone who could love without killing. Now someone had forced her to choose between her old life and her new one. They had taken the horse that connected her to Thomas, the animal that represented everything good she had built from the ashes of who she used to be. They had made it personal. She strapped on the gun belt that still fit her waist like it had been made yesterday. The weight of the Colt felt familiar against her hip, a reminder of skills that muscle memory never forgot. She loaded the Winchester with practiced efficiency, each brass cartridge sliding home with a soft click that sang of precision and death. The trail south was easy to follow for someone who had learned tracking from Chiricahua scouts. 5 riders moving fast but not attempting to hide their passage. They were confident, probably used to taking what they wanted from people too weak or scared to fight back. They had made their first mistake by assuming a widow living alone fell into that category. The trail led down from her mountain meadow toward the valley road, then turned east toward the mining camps that scarred the mountainside like infected wounds. Donna followed on foot, reading the story the horses told with their hoof prints. The lead rider favored his left stirrup, putting more weight on that side, probably an old injury. The second horse had a loose shoe on the right rear hoof, leaving a distinctive mark every 4th step. Details that would matter when she caught up to them. After 2 hours of steady tracking, she found where they had stopped to rest the horses. The men had dismounted near a creek, watering their animals and sharing a bottle that they left behind. Careless. She examined the bottles and found it half full of cheap whiskey, the kind that burned going down and clouded judgment. Better and better, boot prints in the mud told her more about her quarry. 5 men, all wearing riding boots with worn heels. Working men, not gentlemen. The kind who hired out their guns to whoever paid best. One set of tracks was smaller than the rest, probably a young man trying to prove himself. Another showed the wide stance of someone carrying extra weight around the middle. Details that painted a picture of ordinary criminals who had made an extraordinary mistake. She found Black Thunder's tracks leading away from the water, and her jaw tightened. The stallion was fighting them, leaving gouges in the earth where his hooves had slipped as he tried to break free. They were dragging him with a lead rope, forcing him to follow against his will. The horse had spirit, just like Thomas always said. He would not make this easy for them. The trail continued east for another mile before turning north toward a cluster of buildings that squatted in a clearing like buzzards on a carcass. Donna recognized the place from her previous scouting of the territory, a mining operation called the Lucky Strike, owned by a man named Dennis Collins, who had a reputation for taking what he wanted and crushing anyone who stood in his way. She settled into a grove of pine trees on a ridge overlooking the camp and pulled out the field glasses that had served her well during her Army days. The Lucky Strike consisted of a main house, several outbuildings, and a corral where she could see Black Thunder pacing restlessly among a dozen other horses. Armed men moved between the buildings with the casual alertness of hired guns who expected trouble but had grown comfortable with their own reputation. As she watched, a man emerged from the main house and walked toward the corral. Even at distance, Dennis Collins was unmistakable. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commanded attention. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than most men made in a year, but his hands moved with the confidence of someone who had built his fortune through violence as much as business sense. Collins approached Black Thunder with the swagger of a man who believed ownership could be taken at gunpoint. The stallion reared when Collins reached for his halter, striking out with hooves that could cave in a man's skull. Collins stepped back, laughing, and called out to his men. Donna could not hear the words, but she could read the body language. Collins was pleased with his acquisition. He saw Black Thunder as a prize, a symbol of his power over the mountain folk who scratched out livings in his shadow. He had no idea that taking this particular horse was the worst mistake of his life. She spent the rest of the day observing the camp, counting men and noting their routines. 12 gunmen that she could identify, plus Collins himself. They changed guard shifts every 4 hours, and the night watch consisted of only 2 men walking predictable patterns. Professional enough to be dangerous, but not disciplined enough to be unbeatable. As the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky the color of fresh blood, Donna made her decision. She would give them one chance to return what they had stolen, one opportunity to walk away from the reckoning they had brought on themselves. After that, the ghost of the mountains would remind them why some legends were born in truth. Donna approached the Lucky Strike camp as darkness settled over the mountains like a burial shroud. She moved through the pine trees with the silent grace that had made her legendary among the Apache, each footstep placed with deliberate care to avoid snapping twigs or disturbing loose stones. The night guards were exactly where her afternoon surveillance had predicted they would be, walking their routes with the mechanical precision of men who had grown bored with their duties. She reached the edge of the clearing and settled behind a fallen log to study the main house. Light spilled from the windows, and she could hear the sound of men drinking and playing cards. Dennis Collins held court at the head of a rough wooden table, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air as he regaled his hired guns with stories of his latest acquisitions. "That black stallion will bring top dollar in Denver," Collins was saying. "Some rich man's son will pay whatever I ask for a horse with that kind of fire, assuming we can break him proper." One of his men, a lean scarecrow of a gunfighter named Aaron Ruiz, shook his head. "That horse got devil in him, Mr. Collins. Been trying to kick down the corral fence all day. Maybe we should just shoot him and be done with it." Collins slammed his glass down on the table hard enough to make the other men jump. "Nobody shoots that horse, you understand. That animal represents profit, and profit is what keeps you boys in ammunition and whiskey." Donna had heard enough. She circled the camp to approach from the south, where the slope of the mountain provided natural cover almost to the front porch of the main house. The night guards were on the far side of the clearing, their attention focused outward toward potential threats from the tree line. They never considered that death might approach from the open ground they thought was safe. She walked out of the darkness and up to the front door like she had been invited for dinner. Her hand rested on the grip of her Colt, but she made no aggressive moves. Not yet. These men would get their warning, just like she had promised herself. What they did with that warning would determine how many of them saw another sunrise. Donna pushed open the door and stepped into the lamplight. The card game stopped as if someone had fired a shot. 12 hardened gunmen stared at the woman who had appeared in their midst like a ghost made flesh. Dennis Collins slowly set down his cards and leaned back in his chair, his eyes calculating the odds. "Gentlemen," Donna said quietly, "Mr. Collins, I have come for my horse." Collins smiled the way a wolf might smile at a lost lamb. "Your horse, ma'am, I am afraid there has been some misunderstanding. That stallion was payment for a debt owed to me by a man who could not cover his gambling losses. All legal and proper." Donna met his gaze without blinking. "The man who owed you money was not the man who owned that horse. Black Thunder belongs to me, and I want him back." The gunmen were shifting in their seats now, hands drifting toward weapons. Aaron Ruiz had his fingers wrapped around the grip of his pistol, waiting for a signal from Collins. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Collins stood slowly, his height and bulk meant to intimidate. "Even if what you say is true, ma'am, possession is 9/10 of the law out here. That horse is mine now, and I suggest you head home before this conversation takes an unpleasant turn." Donna nodded as if she had expected that answer. "I see. Then let me make something clear, Mr. Collins. My name is Donna Wilson, and 3 years ago I retired to these mountains to live in peace with my husband. Before that, I spent 15 years as a federal marshal and army tracker. The Apache called me Ghost Walker because I could track a man across bare rock and put a bullet through his heart at ranges that would make your boys here wet themselves." The room had gone dead silent. Even the wind outside seemed to have stopped blowing. "I am giving you one chance to return my horse," Donna continued. "One opportunity to avoid the consequences of taking something that does not belong to you. After tonight, if Black Thunder is not back in his paddock by sunrise, I will hunt down every man who had a hand in this theft. I will track you across 3 territories if necessary, and I will kill you all." Aaron Ruiz laughed, a nervous sound that cracked in the middle. "You expect us to believe that story, lady? You are just a widow trying to scare us with tall tales." Donna turned to look at him directly. "In 1879, I tracked 3 Army deserters across the Sonoran Desert for 6 weeks. They had raped and murdered a rancher's daughter near Fort Huachuca. When I finally caught up to them, they were dying of thirst and begging me for water. I gave them justice instead." She paused, letting that sink in. "In 1882, I brought in the Dalton brothers after they robbed the bank in Tombstone. All 4 of them, alive. though they probably wished I had killed them clean instead of letting them hang. Dennis Collins was no longer smiling. He had heard stories about the Ghost Walker, legends that drifted through saloons and mining camps like smoke. Most men dismissed them as frontier mythology, tales grown tall in the telling. But looking into Donna Wilson's copper eyes, he was beginning to suspect that the legends might not be tall enough. "You are bluffing," Collins said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No woman could do the things you are claiming." Donna reached into her coat and withdrew a silver badge that caught the lamplight like a falling star. She placed it on the table in front of Collins, the metal ringing against the wood with the sound of authority. "Federal Marshal appointed by President Hayes himself," she said quietly. "The commission has never been revoked. I have been inactive by choice, not by law." The badge lay on the table like an accusation. Several of Collins's men were staring at it with the kind of recognition that comes from seeing wanted posters in too many sheriff's offices. Aaron Ruiz had gone pale as winter snow. "Even if you are who you claim to be," Collins said, his bravado beginning to crack, "you are just one woman. I have 12 good men here, and more I can call on if needed." Donna picked up the badge and returned it to her coat. "Mr. Collins, in my experience, quantity is a poor substitute for quality. Your men are gunfighters and thieves. I am a predator who has been hunting dangerous men since before some of them were born. The mathematics are not in your favor." She turned toward the door, then paused with her hand on the latch. "Sunrise, Mr. Collins. My horse returned unharmed to my property. After that, we will have a different kind of conversation." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a rifle being cocked. For a long moment, the room remained silent, except for the whisper of cards being nervously shuffled and the tick of the clock on the mantel counting down the hours until dawn. Collins looked around the table at his hired guns, reading doubt in faces that had been confident an hour earlier. These were hard men who had faced down angry fathers and vengeful brothers. But the quiet certainty in Donna Wilson's voice had shaken them in ways that shouted threats never could. "She is just trying to spook us," Collins said, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. "We keep the horse. Double the guard tonight, and tomorrow we move the animal to the Denver buyer ahead of schedule." Aaron Ruiz shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Boss, maybe we should think about this. That badge looked real, and I heard stories about the Ghost Walker when I was riding with the Clanton gang. They say she could track a shadow across midnight and shoot the wings off a fly at 200 yards. Collins slammed his fist on the table hard enough to make the whiskey bottles jump. "I do not care if she is Annie Oakley and Wild Bill Hickok rolled into one person. Nobody threatens Dennis Collins and walks away. We keep the horse, and if that woman shows her face around here again, we put her in the ground where she belongs." But even as he spoke, Collins was remembering stories he had dismissed as frontier nonsense. Tales of a woman marshal who could appear and disappear like smoke, who tracked outlaws across impossible terrain and brought them in dead or alive depending on her mood. Stories that claimed she had learned her skills from Apache warriors and perfected them in service to the federal government. Outside in the darkness, Donna Wilson was already moving through the forest with the fluid grace of a hunting cat. She had given them their warning, offered them the chance to avoid the storm that was coming. They had chosen pride over wisdom, and now they would learn why the Apache had named her Ghost Walker. She made her way back to her cabin through trails that existed only in her memory, paths that Thomas had shown her during their 3 years of marriage. He had been a good man, a gentle man who understood that she needed peace to heal from the violence that had defined her earlier life. But Thomas was gone now, claimed by a fever that no amount of skill with weapons could fight. The men who had stolen Black Thunder had awakened something that Donna had hoped to keep buried forever. They had forced her to choose between the woman she had become and the predator she had been born to be. It was not a choice at all. Back at her cabin, Donna prepared for war with the methodical precision of a professional soldier. She laid out her weapons on the kitchen table like a surgeon arranging instruments, each tool selected for its specific purpose in the work ahead. The Winchester for long-range work, the Colt for close encounters, the skinning knife that could open a throat as easily as it could dress a deer. She cleaned and loaded each weapon with the ritual care of someone whose life had often depended on mechanical perfection. Every cartridge was inspected for flaws. Every moving part was oiled and tested. The work was meditative, calming, a return to skills that had kept her alive through 15 years of hunting the worst men the frontier could produce. As she worked, Donna allowed herself to remember the woman she had been before Thomas taught her that there was more to life than tracking and killing. Sergeant Donna Hayes had been carved from mountain granite and tempered in Apache fire. She had learned to read sign from Chiricahua scouts who could follow a week-old trail across bare rock. She had learned to shoot from Texas Rangers who could put 6 shots through a playing card at 50 paces. But most importantly, she had learned patience from her prey. The men she hunted were dangerous precisely because they were desperate, and desperate men made mistakes when they were pushed too hard too fast. The secret was to apply pressure gradually, like water wearing away stone, until they broke under the weight of their own fear. Dennis Collins and his hired guns were about to receive an education in the difference between killing for money and hunting for justice. They thought they understood violence because they had used it to take what they wanted from weaker people. They were about to learn that there were predators in these mountains that made them look like rabbits. Donna finished her preparation as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the cabin windows. She had given Collins until sunrise to return Black Thunder, and she was a woman of her word, but she had never specified which sunrise, and there were still hours of darkness left for the Ghost Walker to remind them why legends were born in blood. She slipped out of the cabin and into the forest, moving through shadows that seemed to welcome her like old friends. The night guards at the Lucky Strike camp were exactly where she expected them to be, walking their predictable routes with the mechanical precision of men who had grown comfortable with routine. Comfort was the enemy of survival, and these men were about to learn that lesson in the harshest possible way. The first guard died without ever knowing he was being hunted. Donna appeared behind him as he paused to light a cigarette, her knife sliding between his ribs with surgical precision. He dropped without a sound, his blood seeping into the mountain soil like an offering to the darkness. The second guard was more alert, his head turning at some sound that might have been the wind or might have been death approaching on silent feet. He opened his mouth to call out a warning, but Donna's hand clamped over his lips while her blade found his heart. She lowered his body gently to the ground, arranging him in a natural position that would not immediately alarm anyone who glanced in his direction. With the guards eliminated, Donna had free access to the camp. She moved through the buildings like a ghost, gathering intelligence and preparing the battlefield for what was to come. In the bunkhouse, she counted sleeping men and noted the positions of their weapons. In the main house, she observed Dennis Collins pacing by the window, his confidence clearly shaken by her earlier visit. But it was in the stable that she found what she was really looking for. Black Thunder stood in a reinforced stall, his dark eyes reflecting intelligence and recognition as Donna approached. The stallion had been her wedding gift from Thomas, trained to respond to whistle commands that only she knew. He was more than a horse, he was family. "Easy, boy," she whispered, her hand finding the familiar warmth of his neck. "I know they hurt you, but we are going to make this right." Black Thunder nickered softly, pressing his massive head against her shoulder in a gesture of trust that brought tears to her eyes. She checked him over quickly, noting the rope burns on his legs and the cuts where spurs had drawn blood. Collins's men had tried to break him with pain, never understanding that some spirits could not be conquered through cruelty. Donna could have taken Black Thunder and disappeared into the mountains right then. She knew trails that would keep them ahead of any pursuit until they reached territory where Collins's influence could not follow. But that would leave the men who had stolen him free to prey on other people, other families who lacked her particular skills. No, this had gone beyond simple theft the moment they put spurs to her horse. This was about justice, and justice required that Collins and his men understand the consequences of taking what did not belong to them. She slipped back into the darkness, leaving Black Thunder in his stall, but taking with her the knowledge of exactly how the camp was laid out and where each man would be when the reckoning came. The sun would rise in 3 hours, and with it would come the storm that Dennis Collins had brought down on himself through pride and greed. Donna positioned herself on the ridge overlooking the Lucky Strike camp as the eastern sky began to lighten with the promise of dawn. She had chosen her spot carefully, a natural depression in the rocks that provided perfect concealment while offering clear fields of fire to every building below. The Winchester lay across a flat stone, its barrel steady as the mountain itself. Below her, the camp was beginning to stir. Men emerged from the bunkhouse, stretching and yawning as they prepared for another day of enforcing Dennis Collins's will through intimidation and violence. They moved with the casual confidence of predators who had never encountered anything more dangerous than themselves. That was about to change. Collins himself appeared on the porch of the main house, a cup of coffee steaming in his hands as he surveyed his domain. He was dressed in another expensive suit, his hair perfectly groomed despite the early hour. A man who took pride in his appearance, who believed that power and money could insulate him from the consequences of his actions. Donna settled the rifle stock against her shoulder and found Collins in her sights. At this range, less than 200 yards, she could put a bullet through his heart before he even heard the shot. It would be quick, clean, professional. The kind of death that men like Collins were rarely deserved but often received when they pushed the wrong person too far. But that would be too easy. Collins needed to understand what he had brought on himself and his men. He needed to watch his carefully constructed world crumble around him before he paid the final price for his arrogance. Donna shifted her aim to a lantern hanging from a post near the corral. The Winchester cracked, and the lantern exploded in a shower of glass and kerosene. The sound echoed off the mountain walls like thunder, and every man in the camp froze as they realized they were under attack. Collins dropped his coffee cup and dove for cover behind a wooden barrel. His hired guns scattered like startled quail, some running for the bunkhouse while others tried to identify where the shot had come from. None of them looked in the right direction. They were thinking like gunfighters, expecting their enemy to be at ground level where they could see and shoot back. The Ghost Walker had always preferred to hunt from above. Donna worked the lever action and chambered another round. Aaron Ruiz was sprinting toward the stable, probably hoping to use the horses as cover. She led him by 2 steps and squeezed the trigger. The bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him in the dirt. Not a killing shot, but enough to take him out of the fight and send a message to the others. Wounded but not dead. She was playing with them. A muzzle flash erupted from the window of the main house as someone returned fire in her general direction. The shot went wide by 20 yards, but it gave away the shooter's position. Donna put her next bullet through the window frame, sending splinters flying and forcing the gunman to dive for cover. She could hear Collins shouting orders, his voice cracking with the strain of trying to maintain control over a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his ability to manage. His men were professional enough to find cover and return fire, but they were shooting at shadows while she picked her targets with surgical precision. Another gunman tried to reach the horses, probably thinking he could mount up and ride for help. Donna's bullet shattered his leg below the knee, dropping him screaming in the dust. Still alive, still able to tell others what had happened here. The Ghost Walker wanted witnesses to spread the word about what happened to men who stole from her. The pattern continued for 20 minutes. Donna would pick a target, wound rather than kill, and watch Collins's men realize that they were being hunted by someone who could hit them whenever she chose. The psychological effect was devastating. These were hard men who had faced angry sheriffs and vengeful ranchers, but they had never been stalked by a predator who could strike from impossible ranges and disappear back into the rocks like smoke. Collins finally broke. She could see him through the scope, his face pale with terror, as he realized that his money and reputation meant nothing to the woman who was systematically destroying his operation. He began shouting at his remaining men, ordering them to saddle horses and prepare to retreat. That was when Donna decided the lesson had gone on long enough. Her next shot took out the front wheel of Collins's personal wagon, the vehicle he would need to transport the gold and cash that represented his portable wealth. The message was clear. There would be no escape, no running to fight another day. This ended here, in the shadow of the mountains where he had thought himself untouchable. Dennis Collins crouched behind an overturned table in his main house, his expensive suit torn and dirty from diving for cover. Around him, his remaining men nursed wounds and tried to peer through windows without exposing themselves to the sniper, who seemed to see everything and hit whatever she aimed at. "We have to get out of here, boss," one of them said. "She is picking us off like ducks in a pond." Collins wiped sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. "How many men do we have left who can still fight?" Aaron Ruiz, clutching his wounded shoulder, counted on his fingers. "Maybe 6, if you count the walking wounded." She has put 4 men down, and 2 more ran for the hills when the shooting started. The sound of hoofbeats outside made them all freeze. Someone was approaching the camp at a gallop, riding hard from the direction of town. Collins crawled to a window and peered out carefully, expecting to see more of the Ghostwalker's allies arriving to finish what she had started. Instead, he saw a lone rider wearing a deputy's badge, an older man with gray hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades spent enforcing the law in hard country. The deputy reined in his horse near the corral and dismounted, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm as he surveyed the scene of destruction. "This is Deputy Alan Baker," he called out. "I received reports of gunfire. What is the situation here?" Collins saw an opportunity and seized it. "Deputy Baker, thank God you are here. We are under attack by a madwoman who claims to be some kind of federal marshal. She has been shooting at us from the rocks for the past hour." Baker's weathered face showed no surprise at this information. "That would be Donna Wilson," he said calmly. "I figured she might pay you boys a visit after what you did." Collins felt a chill run down his spine. "You know her," Baker nodded slowly. "I have known Donna since she married Thomas Wilson and came to these mountains looking for peace. For that, I knew her reputation from wanted posters and newspaper stories. The Ghostwalker was famous from here to California for bringing in men that other lawmen could not touch." The deputy's voice carried across the camp, clearly intended for Donna to hear as well as Collins. "Donna, I know you are up there. I also know that these men took your horse, and I understand why you are angry. But this has gone far enough. Let me handle this through proper legal channels." From the rocks above came a voice as cold as winter wind. "Hello, Alan. I gave them fair warning to return my property. They chose to ignore it." Baker sighed and shook his head. "Collins, you and your boys have stepped in something that is way over your heads. Donna Wilson is not some widow you can intimidate. She is a federal marshal with a commission that supersedes my authority, and she has every legal right to recover stolen property and arrest the men who took it." Collins felt the last of his confidence crumble. "Legal right, but we outnumber her." Baker laughed, a sound without humor. "Son, I have seen Donna Wilson track 3 Apache warriors across 40 miles of desert and bring them in alive because the Army wanted to question them. I have seen her face down 6 armed men in a saloon and walk away without a scratch while they all needed medical attention. Numbers do not mean much when you are dealing with someone of her caliber." The deputy turned toward the rocks where Donna was concealed. "What do you want to end this, Donna? These men are clearly outmatched, and you have made your point." Donna's voice drifted down from the heights like the whisper of approaching death. "I want my horse returned unharmed. I want Dennis Collins to understand and that there are consequences for taking what does not belong to him. And I want every man here to remember this day the next time they think about preying on people who cannot defend themselves." Collins realized that his only chance was to negotiate while he still had something to bargain with. "Marshal Wilson," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Let us discuss terms. Perhaps we can reach an understanding." There was a long silence from the rocks above. Then Donna Wilson stepped into view, her rifle held casually but ready, her copper eyes reflecting the morning sunlight like polished metal. She began walking down the slope toward the camp, each step measured and deliberate. She moved like a force of nature, inexorable and unstoppable. Collins could see why the Apache had called her Ghostwalker. There was something otherworldly about the way she seemed to float across the rough ground, never stumbling, never hurrying, but covering distance with the efficiency of a predator closing in for the kill. Donna Wilson walked into the Lucky Strike camp like she owned it, which in a very real sense she now did. The surviving members of Collins's gang watched her approach with the kind of fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. Here was the woman who had systematically destroyed their operation from an impossible distance, and now she was coming to collect what they owed her. Deputy Baker stepped forward, positioning himself between Donna and Collins's men. His hand remained near his weapon, but his body language suggested he was more concerned about preventing a massacre than protecting either side. "Donna," Baker said quietly, "these men are beaten. They know they made a mistake. There is no need for more bloodshed." Donna stopped 20 feet from the main house, close enough to see the fear in Collins's eyes, but far enough away to react if any of his remaining gunmen tried something stupid. Her rifle remained ready, and Collins noticed that her finger never left the trigger guard. "Alan," she said without taking her eyes off Collins, "I appreciate your concern, but this is out your jurisdiction. These men stole federal property from a federal marshal. That makes it a federal case." Collins found his voice, though it came out higher than he intended. "Federal property. That horse is just an animal." Donna's copper eyes fixed on him like a hawk studying a rabbit. "That horse was a gift from my dead husband. More than that, Black Thunder was bred and trained for federal service. He carries government brands and has been used in official capacity during my time as a marshal. Stealing him is the same as stealing a federal agent's equipment." She paused, letting that sink in. "The penalty for interfering with a federal officer in the performance of their duties is 20 years in federal prison. The penalty for stealing federal property is 15 years. The penalty for conspiracy to commit both crimes is whatever I decide it should be." Collins felt the walls closing in around him. Everything that had seemed simple an hour ago had become impossibly complicated. He had thought he was stealing a horse from a defenseless widow. Instead, he had committed federal crimes against a woman who had the authority to arrest him and the skills to ensure he did not escape justice. "Marshal Wilson," Collins said, trying to inject some dignity into his voice, "surely we can reach some accommodation. I am a businessman with connections throughout the territory. Perhaps some form of compensation." Donna tilted her head slightly, like a predator, considering whether its prey was worth the effort to kill. "Mr. Collins, I am not interested in your money. I am interested in justice. You took something that belonged to me, and now you are going to return it, along with damages for the harm you caused." "What kind of damages?" Collins asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. Donna gestured toward the wounded men scattered around the camp. "Medical expenses for your men, compensation for my time and ammunition, payment for the emotional distress caused by threatening a federal officer, and punitive damages to ensure you remember this lesson." The number she quoted made Collins's head spin. By the time she finished calculating costs, he would be financially ruined even if he avoided prison. Everything he had built through years of intimidation and violence would be gone, taken by a woman who had outplayed him at his own game. "You are destroying me," Collins said, his voice barely above a whisper. Donna nodded slowly. "Yes, I am. You chose to steal from me, Mr. Collins. You chose to ignore my warning. You chose to believe that your reputation and your hired guns made you untouchable. Every choice has consequences, and now you are learning what yours are." Deputy Baker stepped forward again. "Donna, the man is beaten. He understands the error of his ways. Surely that is enough." Donna considered this for a moment, her eyes never leaving Collins's face. She could see the broken man behind the expensive clothes and arrogant facade. The realization that he had picked a fight with someone far more dangerous than himself had shattered his confidence like glass. "Very well," she said finally. "Here are my terms, and they are not negotiable. Black Thunder is returned to me immediately, unharmed and with all his tack. Mr. Collins pays full restitution as calculated, including medical expenses for his wounded men. And every person here signs a confession detailing their role in the theft, to be held by Deputy Baker in case anyone decides to seek revenge later." Collins nodded rapidly, grateful for any option that did not end with him in a federal prison or a mountain grave. Yes, of course. Whatever you require." Donna finally lowered her rifle, though Collins noticed she did not put it away entirely. "One more thing, Mr. Collins. If I hear of you or any of your men threatening, intimidating, or harming any person in this territory again, I will consider it a personal insult. And I take personal insults very seriously." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. And Collins had no doubt that she meant every one, and more importantly, that she had the skills and authority to carry out whatever punishment she deemed appropriate. An hour later, Donna Wilson stood in her own paddock with Black Thunder, running her hands over the stallion's powerful frame to check for injuries. The horse seemed none the worse for his ordeal, though she could see the anger in his dark eyes. Black Thunder had never forgotten the lessons she had taught him, and he was ready to carry her into battle if she asked. Deputy Baker approached slowly, his weathered face creased with something that might have been admiration. Dennis Collins and his surviving men had departed for town to arrange payment of the restitution, their wounded loaded into a wagon like broken dolls. The Lucky Strike camp stood empty except for the bloodstains that would remind future visitors of what happened when someone crossed the Ghost Walker. That was quite a performance, Baker said. I have not seen anything like it since the old days when the Apache were still raiding through these mountains. Donna continued checking Black Thunder's legs, her touch gentle despite the violence she had unleashed earlier. I did not want it to come to this, Alan. I gave them every opportunity to make it right. Baker nodded. I know you did. Collins is lucky you showed restraint. The Donna Hayes I used to hear stories about would have killed half his men before giving them a chance to surrender. Donna looked up at him, and for a moment Baker could see the woman she had been before Thomas Wilson taught her that there was more to life than hunting dangerous men. The Ghost Walker lived just beneath the surface, patient and deadly, waiting for the next time someone made the mistake of threatening what she protected. I am not that woman anymore, Donna said quietly. Thomas helped me find peace with who I was and what I had done, but some things cannot be taken without consequences, and Black Thunder was one of them. Baker understood. The horse represented more than transportation or even companionship. Black Thunder was her connection to the man who had loved her enough to see past the legend to the woman beneath. Stealing him had been an attack on everything she had built in her new life. What will you do now? Baker asked. Collins will not forget this humiliation. He might try to bring in outside help, men who do not know your reputation. Donna smiled, and Baker felt a chill run down his spine. It was the smile of a predator who had tasted blood and found it to her liking. Let him try, she said. The Ghost Walker has been sleeping for 3 years, but she is awake now. Any man who wants to test himself against her is welcome to make the attempt. She turned back to Black Thunder, her voice softening as she spoke to the horse in the whistle language that only they shared. The stallion responded by nuzzling her shoulder, a gesture of trust and affection that spoke of bonds forged through shared danger and mutual respect. Baker watched them together and realized that something fundamental had changed. Donna Wilson, the peaceful widow, was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. The woman who had tried to leave violence behind had been forced to embrace it again, and the territory would never be quite the same. As he rode back toward town, Baker reflected on the events of the morning. Dennis Collins had learned a harsh lesson about the difference between reputation and reality. His men had discovered that some people could not be intimidated or bought, and the Ghost Walker had reminded everyone why legends were born in blood and carved in stone. The mountains had their protector back, and God help anyone who was foolish enough to test her again. Word of what happened at the Lucky Strike spread through the territory like wildfire. Saloon keepers told the story to anyone who would listen. Miners shared it around their campfires. Ranchers repeated it to their hired hands as a warning about the dangers of underestimating quiet women who lived alone. Within a week, the legend had grown beyond the simple facts. Some versions claimed that Donna Wilson had killed a dozen men single-handedly. Others insisted she had appeared and disappeared like smoke, striking from impossible distances before vanishing into the mountains like a ghost. The truth was simpler and more terrifying than any legend. Donna Wilson was exactly who she claimed to be, a federal marshal with 15 years of experience hunting the most dangerous men on the frontier. She had chosen peace over violence when she married Thomas Wilson, but that choice had always been temporary. The skills remained, honed by years of practice and sharpened by the kind of experience that could not be learned from books. 3 months later, Donna Wilson sat on her porch as the first snow of winter dusted the mountain peaks. Black Thunder grazed peacefully in his paddock, his dark coat gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. The scene was tranquil, domestic, the picture of a widow living quietly in the shadow of the mountains. But appearances could be deceiving. The silver badge rested on the table beside her coffee cup, no longer hidden beneath loose floorboards, but displayed where any visitor could see it. The Winchester leaned against the porch railing within easy reach, and the Colt rode her hip like it had never been put away. Donna Wilson was no longer pretending to be someone she was not. The change had brought unexpected benefits. Travelers on the mountain roads knew they could stop at her cabin and find sanctuary from both weather and human predators. Miners and ranchers sought her advice on matters of law and justice. Even the local Apache bands had begun to acknowledge her presence with the respect due to a proven warrior. She had become what the territory needed, a protector who understood that sometimes peace could only be maintained through the threat of overwhelming violence. The Ghostwalker was no longer a legend from the past, but a living reminder that some people could not be intimidated, bought, or broken. A dust cloud on the horizon caught her attention, and Donna reached for the field glasses that had served her well during her army days. Three riders approached at an easy pace, their posture suggesting they came in peace rather than war. As they drew closer, she recognized Deputy Baker and two men she did not know. The visitors reined in their horses at the edge of her property and waited for permission to approach. It was a courtesy that had become standard since word spread about what happened to Dennis Collins and his men. People had learned to treat Donna Wilson with the respect due to someone who could kill them all before they cleared leather. "Alan," she called out, "you and your friends are welcome. Coffee is fresh if you want some." Baker dismounted and approached the porch, followed by his companions. One was a young man wearing a federal marshal's badge, his face earnest and eager. The other was older, gray-haired, with the kind of calm confidence that spoke of long experience in dangerous work. "Donna," Baker said, "I would like you to meet Marshal Richard Gomez from the Denver office. He has a proposition that might interest you." Gomez stepped forward and touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Marshal Wilson, it is an honor to meet you. Your reputation precedes you, and I mean that in the best possible way." Donna gestured for them to sit in the chairs she kept on the porch for visitors. "Marshal Gomez, what brings you to my mountain?" Gomez settled into his chair and accepted the coffee she offered. "The federal government has been following your recent activities with great interest. The way you handled the Collins situation was exemplary, a textbook example of how to resolve a complex situation with minimal bloodshed and maximum justice." Donna waited for him to get to the point. "We have a problem," Gomez continued. "A gang of bank robbers has been operating throughout Colorado and Wyoming, hitting small towns where local law enforcement is overwhelmed. They are led by a man named Stephen Wright, and they have killed 6 peace officers in the past year." The name was familiar. Stephen Wright had been one of the riders who took Black Thunder, the man she had held in her rifle sights during the final confrontation. He had escaped during the chaos and disappeared into the wilderness, but Donna had always known he would surface again. "What do you want from me, Marshal Gomez?" The older man leaned forward, his eyes serious. "We want you to come out of retirement. Marshal Wilson, the territory needs someone with your skills and experience. Someone who can track these men across impossible terrain and bring them to justice." Donna looked out across the valley where Black Thunder grazed peacefully in the afternoon sunlight. She had found peace in these mountains, built a life that honored Thomas's memory while allowing her to use her skills to protect the innocent. The choice between retirement and active duty was no longer the impossible dilemma it had once been. She had learned that the Ghostwalker and the widow were not separate people, but different aspects of the same woman. She could be both protector and peaceful neighbor, both legend and ordinary person living quietly in the mountains. "Marshal Gomez," she said finally, "I accept your proposition. But I work alone, and I work by my own methods. If those terms are acceptable, then Stephen Wright and his gang will learn what happens when they make the mistake of thinking they can outrun justice." Gomez smiled and extended his hand. "Welcome back to active duty, Marshal Wilson. The territory is lucky to have you." As the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky the color of fresh blood, Donna Wilson began planning her return to the hunt. The Ghostwalker was awake and ready to remind the world why some legends never die. They just wait in the shadows for the right moment to emerge and deliver justice to those who think themselves above the law. The mountains had their protector, and God help anyone who was foolish enough to test her again.